Hello and welcome to the Rugby Show here in the 42.ie. We're live from our newsroom here in Dublin. My own name is Gavan Casey and I'm delighted to be joined once again by Mr. Eddie O'Sullivan. Eddie, how's tricks?
Good, thanks.
We probably didn't expect to have a third test that we could actually look forward to with feverish anticipation. I know last week you and I were reasonably pessimistic with the Lions' chances, but they got it done in the end.
They did, yeah. Probably not the way everyone expected, but they got there. That's all that matters. I mean, I don't think anyone now is going to worry about last week. It'll be all about, it's 1-1. Can the Lions pull this off? A massive, big surprise. Nobody said going down they were going to do it. Everyone's hoping they might put themselves in position. They are in position now, seeking can they do to finish the job,
Yeah, big time. We're looking forward to hearing from you guys at home or wherever you're watching. Keep the comments flying in. If you've got questions for Eddie, do let us know and I'll put them to him here. But one of the first ones, or one of the first issues I wanted to ask you about, Eddie, myself, was I suppose there's almost like a divide or a debate about the All Blacks being down to 14 men. Some of the naysayers will say, like, well, the Lions only won because the All Blacks were down to 14, and then other people were saying, well, this is still the best team in history against a scratch team that have been together for 7 weeks. Whether you have 14 men or not, you should probably be prepared for that scenario. What's your own take on it? Where do you come down on that side of the argument?
I think it's very hard to say that losing Sonny Bill Williams is not a factor in losing the game. And there's real reason for that. I think the All Blacks played well without Sonny Bill. In fact, in this third quarter they dominated because they were able to get on the front foot a bit. They were able to hold on to the ball, and probably the biggest factor was the Lions were sloppy in their discipline, and that's what kept the All Blacks in the game in the third quarter. They actually stretched it out and it was looking pretty grim. But I thought once the Lions got the first try, you could see the whole momentum change, the whole thing in terms of the Lions being more energised and the All Blacks begin to feel the pressure coming on. And I think it did tell in the end. Now, I think there's a few dimensions to this. One is if you look at the discussion around the 10-12 axis for the Lions, Sexton been at 10, and then you've why that dynamics worked with Farrell. Everyone says it did, and the argument is it did because they moved the ball very well. They got 2 very good tries. Probably where wasn't really tested is in the defence, and that's where I think the All Blacks would have looked for that trade-off. That Sonny Bill Williams would have really tested that channel, and I think, of course, with him going off, that channel wasn't tested. So on the upside, yeah, that tactic of getting the 2 first and second 5/8s to move the ball did work, but defensively it wasn't tested, and with Williams off, that was always off the table. The other side of it then, I suppose, is if you're looking at it in terms of Williams being off the field from a defensive point of view, like the Lions' defence was excellent, and as Murray Kinsler showed on the website a number of times, how the Lions got off the line and they were able to slow the ball, and the All Blacks looked at nowhere to go. It's a good reason for that. If you just do the basic numbers, right? So think about it this way: you have 14 defenders, 15 attackers. That means the Lions can commit an extra tackler into that front line to stop the All Blacks getting over the gain line. The All Blacks couldn't get over the gain line and got driven back. It's a slow ruck, so they pour 4 players into that ruck. The ball carrier plus 3. Yeah. So there's 4 players in the ruck now. So there's only 10 attackers left. The Lions put 1 into the ruck. They've got 14 defenders left. They put 3 in the backfield. They still have 11 defenders, and even with Murray sweeping, they have 10 on 10 on the front line.
And you've got no kicking game from the All Blacks perspective.
You can't kick into the backfield. There's 3 full backs. You've got 10 against 10, and the Lions have won the collisions. A slow ball, and then the next pass, the Lions come flying up off the line and smash them again, and smash them again. And that dynamics was set on the basis that the Lions defended well, but it's much easier to defend against 14 attackers than against 15, because you don't have as many compromises, as many trade-offs. And there's lots of times where the Lions didn't have to drift defend. It was man on man, and that's a massive advantage. And I think you can't take that out and say, oh, that didn't matter. It did matter, because eventually, to be fair, they looked pretty toothless, the All Blacks, and that was because the Lions were able to get off the line in numbers. They weren't short in the corners and brought massive pressure. I think that's a factor. You can't take that out of the equation. So I think, look, if you look at it overall and say, oh, no, Sonny Bill, it didn't matter and they're a great team, you can say categorically if Williams had stayed on the field, the Lions would still have won. I think that's a fair comment. Maybe they might have, but it would have been a lot more difficult.
For sure. I mean, what about that penalty that actually did bring the winning of the game for the Lions? I know you spoke about it a little bit on News Talk last night, but a bit of an anomaly now when you've got a player receiving the ball and he jumps.
It was never an anomaly before. And the law as it stands is if you jump out of a tackle as a ball carrier, it's a penalty against the ball carrier. Because again, the logic to that is if you're allowed to jump out of a tackle, it's dangerous play. You catch a player in the face with your boot jumping out of a tackle. And I've seen penalties awarded for players jumping out of tackles. It's very rare because people never do it because it's a penalty. It's kind of, this anomaly is coming on the back of protecting the ball carrier in the air. Now, back in the day, you could play the ball carrier in the air, but we've all said this is a bad idea. Fellas are going to land their head, let's take that out of it. And we've gone out protecting the ball carrier in every circumstance. It makes sense to protect him in the air, even in the tackle now. If you go in and you try and make a tackle, but you happen to slip up, it's still a penalty. We've got to protect the player. And we've now got this anomaly in the tackle on the other side of it, is that if I receive a pass and I jump in the air to catch it, the defender can't tackle me anymore. So what's he do now? He just lets me go, and that's an anomaly. And we've seen players milk that in the air, where they're coming down, they're about to get smashed, and they tuck their knees, and they get that extra half-second hang time, and if they get hit, it's a penalty. You'll see players now, I think, saying, oh, I'm going to get hit here, so I'm going to jump and take the ball, and now what's the defender do? So we've got a little anomaly in here, and Kieran Reid was interesting. He said to the referee, he says, well, so the next time, after the penalty, the next time I receive a pass, if I jump, no one can tackle me. And the ref said, go away.
Yeah, well, it was probably a fair point from Kieran Reid, though.
It was a very fair point.
When you think about it, are we going to get to a situation now where if a game is at a deadlock with 3 minutes to go, you've got the ball, do you play the pass a little bit higher to the man outside you?
Well, we know if the game is tight and there's the last couple of minutes you need a penalty and you're carrying the ball, it makes sense to duck into the tackle when you're being tackled, because if it's not your fault if you get tackled high, it's the tackler's fault. He's got to adjust to you. So if you can see that creeping in on that side of the game, and players kind of tucking their knees to get more hang time on the high ball, well, it makes sense that some players are going to go, you know what, yeah, I'm going to jump for this pass and hopefully someone tackles me. So, now, to be fair, these things emerge as the game develops, because there's nobody in World Rugby trying to set this up. They're saying, let's make it safe for the ball carrier. But in that situation, there's an anomaly around it, that the ball carrier has an advantage now by jumping to take a pass and can't be tackled. I think they're going to have to address that if it starts occurring. But as you know, it's a matter of time before players figure these things out themselves. Yeah,
big time. Kyle Sinclair might have discovered something by accident there. I don't think there was anything cynical in what he did, but
no, I think Sinclair did the natural thing. The ball was high, he jumped for it. The All Black player came in, made the tackle because he had to tackle him, but happened to be his feet were off the ground. Referee says it's a penalty, and that's the Hess game.
That is it. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. One from John Kidney for you, Eddie. He says, with Sexton and Farrell starting, would you go for a 6-2 split on the bench with 2 locks or back rows for extra ballast in the last quarter? Lovely wording there from John. He should be asking these questions instead of me, I think.
With all splits and all selections on the bench, they're all trade-offs. So like you saw last week there, they had Theo and Noel. And Noel got on the field actually and played a pretty good part in the game. But if you go with only 2 backs cover, there's a trade-off. Okay, you've got cover with your 2 10s on the field. If you put Theo as your second back, who covers your back 3 if there's an injury? If you put Noel as your second man, who covers the midfield if there's a centre injury? Yeah. So there's the trade-off there. So by going with that split of 2 backs on the field, you could be in trouble either in your midfield with a midfield injury or a back 3 injury. No, it could be more catastrophic if you get 3 backs get injured, as can happen in a game. You could lose a couple of backs in half a game. If you lose a third back, now you're up with a forward in the middle of the field or a forward on the wing, and that's real trouble. If you could be sure you wouldn't get 3 injuries or you wouldn't get injuries in certain positions, you could roll that dice, but you can never be sure of these things. And you see teams taking that risk. Maybe they've got a flanker who's pretty comfortable in certain positions, or they've enough of talent across the back line. Like they maybe say Watson could go to full back, in that situation, and Noel goes to the wing, but then again, what if there's injury in the centre? All these trade-offs, they'll have to go through them ad nauseum to find out everything is covered. Because the problem now with benches and rugby is they're loaded up, because you have to cover at loose head, tight head, hooker, and then you've got second row, back row. So you're down to 3 backs covering effectively 7 positions. So and 2 of them are specialists, scrum half and a 10. But no, without the 10, you have 1 more specialist, So it's not simple. You've got to thread your way through that, and if you get it wrong, you're an idiot. And if you get it right, you're a genius. But you can never tell who's going to get hurt.
That's fair enough. Fionn Bohan, cheers Fionn for getting in contact. He says, how big a loss will Sonny Bill Williams be? I suppose with Ryan Crotty out now as well, or it's looking very likely that he's out.
I think that's the bigger picture. It's the knock-on effect. You've got Ben Smith out, you've got Ryan Crotty out, and you have Sonny Bill Williams out. So you've taken 3 key players out of their backline. And their whole midfield combination, they've got to start looking at it. And Barrett has played 2 games now where he hasn't been a first receiver for both of them for all the game.
It's true.
He's had to move around.
Yeah.
Which I think is a big disadvantage to them, because when he's a first receiver, they really fire better as a team. He just manages the game a lot better. His place kicking's been off. Do they bring in somebody who can kick penalties better than Barrett? This could come down to a penalty shootout in the weekend, and it's going to rain again. So they've got some tough decisions in their back. I suspect they'll go with Fakato in the centre, be a straight swap in for Sonny Bill Williams. Even
though he hasn't played now since that ill-fated game in Dublin where he scored 2 tries and almost beheaded Simon Zebo.
Yeah, I think they'll still go to what's the best option for them. They'll forget about Dublin. Secondly, I think there's talk of Jordy Barrett coming in
at 15. Yeah,
at 15. It's a massive call. He's a very young player. It's just Super Rugby is Super Rugby, but this is a massive leap up. I just can't see them taking that risk, because if somebody misfires at full back, generally mistakes at full back are pretty expensive. You can make mistakes.
Saw that with Liam Williams' first test, of course.
Yeah, small things make a big impact. So I think he'll probably just go with Fakato in the midfield and play it from there. Play very aggressive. They're going to play very aggressive into the Sexton Farrell channel. They're going to go in there. There's no doubt about it. They were going to do it last week, except Sonny Bill didn't stay around for it. But you even saw late in the game, I think it was
Lau Mape, was it?
Yeah, he got down that channel. They got a leech on him one time, and they went from the 22 about 10 metres from the goal line. That was right down that channel, looking for it straight away. Maybe
he's another option as well, apart Fekatoa aside, Lau Mape. He's never started for the All Blacks, but as you said yourself there, he did make fairly serious yardage in a small cameo.
He could go there. The only thing is, he's never started for the All Blacks, and it seems very unimportant. But actually, starting a test game is a massive difference than being on the bench. And I've seen with players, some players are fantastic bench players, but not particularly good in the start. And it's almost the build-up can get to a young guy who hasn't much experience. If you're told on Tuesday, you're starting next Saturday, the whole build-up, the pressure of all that, whereas you're on the bench, it's completely different. You're going to be sitting in the stand, and then somebody goes down, you're in, you haven't time to process, you haven't time to think, you just jump in, get warmed up, on you go. And you just jump in at the deep end, and that suits probably younger players who haven't had the pressure of the build-up. So I have a feeling he might just say, look, it's going to be a steadier selection, put Fekato on there, he has experience. And, again, we're speculating based on me trying to get inside Steve Sanson's head. But I think there are factors he'll have to weigh up in it.
Fair enough. We've got another one here from a person, man, woman or child, called Range Rover. Cheers, Range, for getting in contact. They said, do you think it's true that McGrath is in for Vunipola and that Peter O'Mahony will be back on the bench? Actually, that was what we were going to go on to next anyway, as team selection. But I think the McGrath for Vunipola call is kind of a no-brainer, and I don't even think it necessarily comes down to just the fact that Vunipola had 4 penalties, 2 at fairly crucial junctures in the game last weekend. I think just McGrath is a better scrummager.
I think I wouldn't disagree with all that. I think Vunipola almost lost the test from, let's be honest. I mean, it was just crazy stuff. And in fact, his clean out on Barrett wasn't far away from what cost Sonny Bill a red card. It was, and it wasn't even a necessary clean out. Barrett was no threat to the ball.
No, but it was just after he had sort of cleared Barrett out, and after a kick, he'd only conceded a penalty on Barrett minutes before.
Yeah, it was doubling down. So look, I think there's a strong case, apart from all the penalties, as you say, for Jack McGrath coming in. I think he's had a fantastic tour. I think he's an excellent scrummager, and the Lions were under pressure on the scrum, earlier in the game. So I have a feeling that might be the best option. The temptation is not to change the team because they won, but I think if they were making a change, that is the one they will make. I can't see him changing. The back row stay the same. I don't see him changing the bench unless he wants to put Peter O'Mahony in, but that would probably at CJ Sanders' expense, because maybe he wants a line-out presence, late in the game or something, or maybe if he does that, then you could say, well, Stander will bring you some ball carrying oomph off the bench. So what do you want at the back end of the game? So I think that could go either way, but I don't see a compelling reason to change the bench. But I see a compelling reason for changing Loosehead.
Yeah, for sure. Would Roman Poit, being the referee for Saturday, come into that at all? Obviously, he's sort of I think he's almost like an overbearing father of the modern day scrum, just standing over, demanding a lot of people, and maybe a bit more pernickety than a lot of his colleagues when it comes to scrum time.
The French referees are different in a sense that they referee a different style of rugby every week in France, and they do change when they come to international level. They don't referee the top 14 like they referee international, and they make the adjustment because that's what's required. But the one area that they're pretty trenchant on is the scrum, and the scrum in France is a big deal because that is always seen as a weapon of choice for winning penalties. So like top 14 rugby, scrum, first thing on the agenda, and same with Pro D2, first thing on the agenda, win a penalty. Stick it to the corner, maul, penalty, 3 points. That's a good attacking strategy in French rugby. So the referees referee the scrum, and what they tend to do is they make their mind up earlier which scrum is the dominant and which is the scrum is the weaker, and they referee the game through that prism. So sometimes if you give up a couple of early penalties in the scrum, you might get penalised down the track even though you weren't quite at fault, but the referee in his head has decided this is the dominant scrum. And they will give penalties at the scrum. They don't faff about with free kicks or warning front throws or don't do that again. It's a penalty and that's the end of it. They're very strong in that area, and they might be wrong, but that doesn't mean they won't make the call.
Yeah, big time. I think like what we've seen in the past, like I was looking back at England Australia from last summer, and there were so few scrums in the game completed at all. You know, it was a penalty either way.
Well, I think players are afraid to knock on the ball because you don't know which way the penalty will go at the scrum. You know, but it's a strong area for them. But the trouble is on the weekend is there could be a number of scrums because it's going to be wet again. There's going to be handling errors. It could be an area that could, you know, have a bearing on the game.
Yeah, there's a. No, for sure. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. There's still a few comments coming in here. Might put this one to Eddie, actually. It's an interesting one from Barry Cullinan. He asks, does Eddie feel that Sean O'Brien and Johnny Sexton are benefiting from playing more games compared to the stop-start nature of their games under the IRFU player management programme?
Well, I think, to be fair, that the stop-start nature of their games is not down solely to the player management programme. They've been injured. Sean O'Brien's been injured a lot.
Certainly O'Brien,
calf injuries and stuff, and Johnny has had knocks as well. So they probably would have played more had they not been injured. There's no doubt for a professional player getting a run of games under your belt at the high end, particularly late in the season. Like when you get to the end of the season, there's this trade-off between fatigue and performance. But you can almost, if you're trying to save yourself, you can lose your edge. So you're almost better at the end of the season just going for it and playing right through. And maybe in retrospect, when you see the way Johnny's season ended up at Leinster, as people felt, and I think it was a fair point that he maybe should have played a bit more. He was probably taken out a bit too much later in the season because we're thinking the Lions on top of everything. But funnily enough, since he's got a run of games in the Lions, he's actually come good.
We actually saw a similar thing with him 4 years ago. I mean, he was injury plagued going into the Lions tour in Australia, and he lasted.
Yeah, it's that ultimate again trade-off. I mean, you want at the end of the season you're trying to mind players' fatigue levels, but ultimately holding guys off, they can lose their competitive edge on the field. There's nothing like playing rugby on the field. All the training you do is never going to replicate it, so you have to go out and play. And sometimes you get a run of those games, and if you're lucky with injuries, you don't get injured and you play through. As we've seen with Sean O'Brien, this is probably Sean O'Brien's best run for a long time without getting injured. He's on top of his game at the moment. At the end of the season, now you could argue, yeah, some of the rest he got during the season has given him that fuel in the tank. That's what you could talk about. But in my experience, when players get a run of games where they're not injured and they're able to play, they get better and better and better. And that's when you want guys in form at the end of the season. And that's what we're seeing now with Sexton and O'Brien, I think. Yeah, for sure. Mark Stembridge asks, we've kind of touched on this already, but actually it's still an interesting question. Can you see anyone outside of the 23 from last week getting into the squad for the third test? Now we've sort of spoken about the squad, but are there any candidates? I mean, Ian Henderson impressed for 70 of 80 minutes against the Hurricanes, but then you see Courtney Knowles do quite well when he came on last week. It's difficult to make a case for him. I'd be surprised because everyone said after Henderson's performance he should have been in the 23. He didn't make it in. He had no other opportunity to reprove that. You know, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything changed in Warren Gatlin's mind from last week regarding Ian Henderson. He knew what he was going to get from him, and he still didn't pick him. I don't know there's anybody that went in there last week and he says, oh, Henderson's going to do a better job than him. You never know, but I don't think there's any evidence that you'd think he would change his mind on that. Yeah, for sure. Kieran Prendergast asks, can the Lions consider themselves lucky in terms of their relative lack of injuries, or would the likes of Billy Vunipola, Ben Youngs and Stuart Hogg made a big difference? I think Billy Vunipola would have made a big difference. He was the one guy that New Zealand didn't want to see on the plane. And he could have been the difference between winning the first test and not winning the first test.
Yeah.
Because definitely, I think if you talk to people in New Zealand, they'll tell you that he was the one player that they felt could be a game changer for the Lions, and then he didn't make it. So I think they do a sigh of relief on that one. But other than that, no, I think he's the one guy that would have made a difference, and maybe, the series could be over now if he had played in the first test.
Jesus, yeah. I mean, like Hogg kind of, I suppose he's after becoming a bit of a forgotten man in a sense, because had this remarkable Six Nations and has been on this unbelievable run, and then you kind of think all of a sudden the Lions are a little bit short of fullback when he goes home, and Liam Williams kind of explodes onto the scene. But he's been threatening it for a while.
I think I've been watching Williams all season, and I thought he's been outstanding for Clonetla. He's been outstanding for Wales. I always felt it's going to be very hard from once he got on the plane not to have him in the test side. And it's somewhere in the back three. He's very versatile. He can play fullback and he can play. He's a very smart footballer. His big penchant that sometimes is his discipline lets him down now and again, but his form this year has been outstanding. I mean, even in the Pro 12 final, he was outstanding. So he's a form guy and he's a great footballer, and he's kind of at the peak of his powers. I mean, it's no shock that Saracens have signed him. They see a lot in him.
Yeah, for sure. One more question, if you don't mind, Eddie, before we get a prediction from you. I'm hoping for a more positive one than last week. But a person called J-A-H, asks, what are your thoughts on the Munster coaching situation at the moment? It's not looking great for them, it'll have to be said.
I think the massive challenge for Munster now is to thread their way through this transition to a new coach and try and hold everything in place. I think it's the worst possible time for this to happen to them, because in most scenarios when a coach says I'm leaving in 6 months, you say, right, you might as well leave now and let's get on with the next stage. Munster can't do that for a couple of reasons. One, I think, is it's a very expensive exercise for Munster to let Erasmus and Niederbar go now. But even if they had the resources to do that, and is that they don't have anybody to take over now. There's pre-season starting, I think, in next week. In fact, if it hasn't started already in some shape or form. So they have nobody actually to take over now, even if the two boys jumped in a plane in the morning, which is a bit of a disaster. So now what they do is they've got to go out and find somebody. Assuming they find somebody, that could take realistically 2 or 3 months. They're going to the market very late. If they found somebody in November or October at the earliest, how's that transition happen during the season? When does that person come in? They've got to set out their stall, their philosophy, their way of doing things. This is in the middle of a season. At what point does the baton change hands? Does it change hands at Christmas when, Razzie gets on the plane, or does it happen, when the new coach arrives and October is available? Is there a slow passing of the baton, or is it that's a nightmare. I mean, how does that work? And the point is, how does everything hold together around that? And it's Munster are facing a massive, massive challenge in this area, is how they transition to a new coach in mid-season. It's a very difficult thing to do without some sort of problems, and maybe they can do it. If they do it, it'll be a hell of an achievement, because where Munster have got, probably, to be fair to Erasmus, they overachieved last year. If you told Munster supporters this time last year you'll get to the semi-final of Europe and you get to the final of the Pro 12, they'd have bit your hand off. But they did. So the expectations now that's the baseline now. We maybe go further if Razzie was staying, but even if leaving now, we should be in that realm. It's going to be hard to stay there with that sort of change going on. And the danger for them is they slip back and they lose a season. And hopefully they won't, but the challenge to do that is huge. And there is a bit of anger out there, because now, Erasmus said in April, I'm definitely staying. And then 3 months later he says, I'm definitely leaving. And the problem is if Munster knew this 3 months ago, they could probably have a coach now to take over from Erasmus for the pre-season. Like, in fairness, Connacht have got their business done. It didn't help them though what happened last Christmas. But having said that, a new coach would have had a pre-season. That's off the table now for Munster. So I can understand a little bit of anger that he gave him his word in April and then he changed it again, 3 months later. But it's done and dusted now. It's not going to change. They'll probably have to stay with him until they find somebody. But for me, the big challenge for Munster is to thread their way through that labyrinth of coaches changing over or handing the baton in the middle of a season and try and keep everything on the field working well. Maybe they can do it, but it's the last thing they need at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Like, is there a case to be made, given that they are still under contract until Christmas, as you mentioned, that you could maybe bring in somebody almost as an understudy, or have them in more like advisory roles where you could smooth over that transition? I'm talking nonsense, am I?
Really are, yeah, because you need whoever comes in has to take over. So, like, they've got to find a head coach who wants to put his stamp on the team. Like, in fairness, Erasmus put his stamp on this team. Everyone knew what they were about. You might disagree with their tactics at times. That's not the issue. The issue is that he put his stamp on the team. The next person in has to do the exact same thing. He wants it done his way. This is how we do it. And every coach does that. You know, you don't want somebody coming in who's like wishy-washy in what they want. What players want is definitive actions. This is what we're doing. So at what point do you flip the switch there between the new coach and Erasmus? Normally it's easy doing the off-season. You draw a line in the sand and you get on. In the middle of a season, that's very difficult. That's my maybe worry for Munster. Hopefully they can pull it out some way, but I'll tell you what, I think it won't be easy. Yeah, well, let's finish on a more positive note then, Eddie. What's going to happen this Saturday in Eden Park, do you reckon? I think, interestingly, I'm more upbeat this week. Not because the Lions won last week, in the sense the way they won. Okay. Apart that, I think the fact that they got a result, there's massive pressure back on the All Blacks. Massive, massive pressure, because, like, if they lose this game to the Lions, it changes the perception of their brand. It changes the invincibility thing about them. It also probably takes a little bit away from everything they've achieved up to now. You know, they are vulnerable. And whereas they win on Saturday, everything goes back to plain sailing, you know, and everyone says, oh yeah, the Lions won one because of, you know. But that puts massive pressure on the Lions, which is a little bit of inexperience in the middle of the field. This is an area that they normally don't have too many issues in. Yeah. So they're not firing on all cylinders. The stakes are very high, and pressure can tell, and no matter who you are, pressure can tell. So I think that in this case, I'm a little more optimistic. I think the pressure could tell on the All Blacks. It could be enough to give the Lions the edge. And if that midfield doesn't gel, whatever midfield they go for, that could be the difference at the end of the day. Well, I like the sound of that compared to this day last week or whenever it was anyway. But that is all we've got time for on the Rugby Show on the 42.ie. Eddie, thanks a million for joining us. We'll speak to you again soon. We will be back tomorrow with Murray Kinsella, who is still locked in a basement, I think, from last week. We'll get him out eventually. Looking forward to the chat with Murray. Thanks to you guys for watching and for all of your comments as well. They were great. Until tomorrow, take it easy.